Hello，各位线上的朋友，大家好，有听到我的声音吗？
Hello everyone, can you hear me?
嗯，欢迎大家来听这场论坛。
Welcome to today's forum.
先跟大家讲
And
一下，
before we
我们的
begin,
是会有中文跟英文的。
just a few housekeeping items. First, we have interpreting services for today. So if you need to listen to interpretation, on the lower right-hand side, you should be able to see a globe icon. So by clicking on it, you get to select the language that you would like to listen to. And the second thing is, at the end of the forum, we are going to leave about 15 minutes for QA. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section first, and we are going to ask them for you. So welcome again. So today's forum is actually the second session focused on the Philippines. So this is a event. Of course, the title is Necessary Fictions, Negotiating Realities in Post-National Philippine Documentaries. And it's a collaboration between TIDF and Filipino curators. And to be honest, today's forum, in terms of the timing, I think it's really unique because we know that on Monday, the Philippines just had a presidential election and the results are out. So today, we are going to talk about collective action, individual decisions. So this topic for the audience here in Taiwan, it's also quite familiar because back in the 1980s, we actually shared a very similar history with the Philippines. And in the past, we actually showed 3 films. It's going to continue showing until May 22nd. You can see them on our official website. So the 3 films include Red Saga from the Dark Depths. And if you look at the images of the films, you will see a lot of similarities between the films, between the realities. So I think it's a topic that is going to resonate with a lot of us. And before I begin, I'm also going to show you this booklet. So there are a lot of articles and illustrations. So if you buy 2 tickets, you can redeem this booklet at our front desk at the TIDF. And today we are very honored to have Patrick as the host, and we have 3 other speakers. We have Kiri, Rose, and Maricon. So I'm going to turn over the floor, the microphone to Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you, Wood. Thank you for having us in this edition of TIDF and for connecting broadly the shared and similar histories that we have. So we have a rich tradition of film collective, political film collective in the Philippines, rooting in this concept of the people's cinema. And just before I introduce our panelists and get to talk with them, I'd like to show you 3 clips that I selected from 3 films for us to better understand the things that we will be talking about, especially for those who have not seen any of these films or who are hearing about political film collectives in the Philippines. So the first clip will be from Beyond the Walls of Prison, which was made in the mid-1980s in response to the Marcos dictatorship. The second one is from the film Red Saga, whose lead filmmaker is with us tonight. And the last one is from a very recent film called River of Tears and Rage, which is made by another panelist who will be with us tonight. So let's watch it first.
For Alfredo Mansos, each day spent in prison was a struggle against brutal and subtle harassments. But throughout his stay in prison, he and his fellow detainees were determined to assert and defend their rights. They were aware that even as they suffered the indignities of imprisonment because of their political ideals, their countrymen outside prison and military stockades suffered harsh oppression and repression. For in the entire 20-year Marcos regime, civil liberties were curtailed. The working class suffered severe blows during the Marcos regime. They were banned from striking for just wages and improved working conditions. Attempts to organize and unionize were met by intimidation from the management. Trade union leaders were arrested and indefinitely detained, picket lines were dispersed, sometimes resulting in the violent death of strikers. Factories and workers' communities were raided by military operatives. The Marcos dictatorship relied heavily on its military infrastructures to directly implement its fascist laws upon the people. The combined force of dictatorial decrees and the monstrous military machinery sought to crush all opposition, not only the armed struggle in the countryside, but also the mass movement in the cities. The military institutions stood mightily to quell all forms of opposition. No one was spared.
There. So I'd like to introduce our panelists now, one by one. First one is Rose Roque, who is an assistant professor at the Polytechnic University of the Philippines, a scholar of Philippine political film collectives, and archival preservation advocate for AsiaVisions Audio Visual Collection. So the clip from which the film you saw earlier is part of this collection that Rose Roque is well looking after, sort of, and promoting and bringing back to memory. The next panelist is Kiri Dalena. She's an artist, filmmaker, cultural organizer, member, contributor, and co-founder of the political media collectives Resbak. This is a relatively new collective which stands for Respond and Break the Silence Against the Killings, or specifically the killings under the Duterte regime, the presidential regime that had just ended. And also part of the Southern Tagalog Exposure, or STeX. And she was the lead filmmaker of Red Saga from the clip that you just saw. And Red Saga is part of the program of TIDF, as well as another film by Kiri called From the Dark Depths. And the last panelist, last but not least, is Maricon Montajes. She's a filmmaker and a member and contributor to the political media collectives Kodao Productions, with which she produced the film that you just saw, a clip from the film you just saw from last year, and another collective called Sine, Sanyata. So let's welcome them. Hello, thank you. Yeah, so I was telling the group earlier that this is really an incredible moment to be talking about political films, right? We had just emerged from a national election, but let us really begin from the beginning. I think it's also very important that we begin from the beginning, no? Not with Marcos Jr. or Bongbong Marcos, who will be president soon, but with the father, Marcos Sr., and of course the conjugal dictatorship of Imelda and Ferdinand Marcos. Let me begin by just asking the historical question. So what can we say, or what do we know about the roots of Philippine political film collectives, or sometimes referred to as people's cinema? Maybe Rose, you can start us with this question, no? The roots, the beginnings of this kind of filmmaking.
Hi, good evening. Well, I'm still discovering more of information about political film collectives, but so far, since I started getting to know about them, the very first one that you mentioned, the AsiaVisions group, around 1982, they started as the Creative Audiovisual Specialists, but it's a very short period. They called themselves CAVS. They immediately changed it to AsiaVisions, precisely because they wanted to have that vision that encompasses the Philippines as part of Asia, as a third world country. So, and eventually there's this group, Alternative Horizons. It was established 1986. It's more of a media cooperative. The first one, AsiaVisions, became an NGO around 85. So that period is the latter part of the Marcos dictatorship, the senior. So those were the groups that I would like to highlight now, especially AsiaVisions.
Yeah, so I think maybe it's more well known that we made some of the really brave full-length narrative films during the period of the Marcoses, but it's also really worth highlighting that we began a really strong tradition of collective political collective filmmaking during the same period. Could we speak a little bit about what was happening then that would, in a way, ironically nurture such such a resistant and activist and enraged kind of filmmaking. No? So I mean, it's really a great moment to reflect on what we are forgetting by electing Bongbong Marcos. No? So can you speak a little bit about the very context by which these collectives emerged, right? In a way, they were nurtured and they flourished within a specific context.
Focusing on AsiaVisions, the core group, those who started it, are artists from different fields. Like Lito Tiongson is a theater director who by then realized the power of audiovisual production by being starting as apprentice of Lino Broca. If we know Lino Broca, very engaged in, aside from mainstream films, in engagement in films with political advocacy. So he saw that power of audiovisuals, the mobility as opposed to theater production. So, and other members are visual artists and writers, and they're all incidentally government employees. So what propelled them was that situation that they're artists in the government sector. They pulled their resources, even utilizing the very resources of the government. They're in that position to maximize. So using their skills, their beginnings from the different artistic fields, they came up with this group, but they've been engaging in, like, Mowel Fund, one of the member, like Jose Quaresma. He also made a film with Fedi Espiritu, and I know the film Sabangan, it would be one of the films that would be we're working on to be screened, I guess. I know we've been talking with the organizers of the TIDF for featuring Sabangan. So that film I'm talking about is a product of Mobile Fund with these people, and it's another group. So essentially, there's this engagement. They wanted to do something, address the question of development for whom, and the issue of, in general, the audiovisual, the culture for whom. So they're really they're very conscious that they're making something for propaganda, and not the propaganda that serves the elite, but serves the people.
Thanks, Rose. I think the clip that we picked is a very powerful clip, no? That shows exactly why these collectives that sprung during that period were very important. No? They were able to capture and document and chronicle what was happening. That cannot be denied, right? The cameras were there. We could see everything just in the 2-minute clip that I showed you, things that can never be denied, right? Because the documentary filmmakers were there and present. Maybe I'll just jump forward a little and ask Kiri and Maricon, maybe do you see yourselves and your work in collectives somehow as being part of this history? Have you known these collectives before doing your own work, and how would you consider your relationship to this history? Maybe Kiri can go first.
Yes, okay. Hello, Patrick, Rose, and Maricon. Yes, definitely. When it's mentioned that I co-founded Southern Tagalog Exposure, it's a film group that was based outside of Manila. We formalized it in 2001. And I do remember actively seeking or understanding the importance of history. There were 3 of us in SC Exposure who actively looked for films of AsiaVisions and also did research about, perhaps they also wrote manifestos or some statements that we could use as a sort of a learning experience. And there was a conscious effort to really be part of this tradition, this heritage of rich political filmmaking and specifically collectives. I do remember also that understanding that the conditions are very different at that time. Perhaps there was a a dearth of film collectives at that time because they were still using film camera 16 millimeter that was very expensive, and during our time this was the advent of digital filmmaking. But definitely we watched the films from Enjola Massacre, Sa Liyab ng Libong Sulo. We searched for archives at that time. AsiaVisions, the films of AsiaVisions, they were still housed in Ibon Foundation, if I'm not mistaken, in Santa Mesa. So we sought these films and tried to review and be inspired by and find out what were their strategies, how they were able to make films during the time of martial law. So yes, it was conscious, and we were hoping that we would really connect ST exposure to this tradition.
Thank you, Kiri, for pointing that out. I guess it's also worth just commenting quickly before Maricon that since some other great films are showing at TIDF, some other great Philippine shorts, I think that the ethos that Kiri was mentioning of seeking out and continuing tradition is really striking to me, because I think the other element of independent filmmaking, alternative filmmaking, those films that really broke the mold of conventions and really tried to do something new. In a way, they were breaking from tradition, right? So there were new films in the digital period that were whose goal was to break from tradition. But I'm struck by Kiri's answer, no, that when they started the collective, they were actively and consciously seeking to continue tradition, which really creates a history. No? We can really speak of a history because they're really connected. How about Maricon, who's active now and more recently?
While I was talking to a senior colleague of Kodao Productions, and I asked about the Kodao's history, and to my surprise, when Kodao was established, some of the people who organized Kodao during EDSA 2 were actually from AsiaVisions. He mentioned that. So it's clearly a continuation of the political tradition. And I'd also like to emphasize that I think that this continuation of the political tradition was also brought about by the political context during that time. I think Kodao was established year 2001 during EDSA 2. This was, I was still in high school during this time, but according to my colleagues in Kodao, it was a very intense period since the ex-president Joseph Estrada was facing perjury and plunder cases. So right then and there, some filmmakers, progressive filmmakers, decided to document the people's struggle during that the popular mass movements during that time. Hence the creation of the documentary Oust, which was about the people's action, people's movement during the ouster of Erap Estrada, Joseph Ejercito Estrada. So it's clearly a continuation. And if I were there, I think our film collective would definitely be on the forefront in documenting that kind of historical moment. Yeah.
Patrick,
Thank you, Maricon. So I think that's another interesting notion of continuity, where the original members of the collectives from the 1980s were part of the later collectives. No, in a way, they remained active. No, Rose, go ahead.
Yes. Well, we have a lot to talk about, but I would just really like to add about this history because it's very important too. The film Beyond the Walls of Prison, giving context, was made 1987. It's made using U-matic. By then, they were already using both the 16 millimeter and the U-matic. And most of the works by AsiaVisions would be then pneumatic eventually in pneumatic magnetic format. That's the reason that we have this archival preservation now, because those pneumatic tapes still survive. Special credit to the maintenance staff of Ibon Foundation, who was there in the office mentioned by Kiri, who really painstakingly rewinded all the tapes, even if it's stored in a non-air conditioned room, etc. But his painstaking work really benefited us now, because the tapes survived. So anyway, the Beyond the Walls of Prison is made during yung reunion of the political prisoners, because they were because of the fall of the dictator Marcos. Definitely all political prisoners should be out of jail. So it's a story of them. But of course, the documentary also looked back about the past regime. Many of the artistic works that were not surfaced during the Marcos dictatorship definitely surfaced post-EDSA. And this is one of those early documentation or documentary about the Marcos atrocities as experienced by the political prisoners, focused on the Beyond the Walls of Prison. And last, about Kodao, I managed to also made my undergraduate thesis about Kodao, the first 3 years of Kodao. And interestingly, it was an offer by a radio station producer to the Bagong Alyansang Makabayan. It's a network of the progressive organizations, then alliance. They were offered a slot, a radio program slot in DZRH. RJ, because it's Ramon Jacinto who's the owner. He offered the slot, and then the Bayan coursed that offer to the people mentioned by Maricon who were part of AsiaVisions. So, but not all are part of AsiaVisions. Like I mentioned, the documentary Sabangan, one of the founders of Kodao actually is part of Sabangan. So it's like a confluence, people from, with past experiences, they just immediately responded to that opportunity. So they combined two departments, the radio department for that program in DZRJ. They called it Ngayon na Bayan, like it's now people, Bayan as people, or it's now Bayan as nation. So anyway, that radio program suffered the crackdown of the Gloria Macapagal Arroyo presidency, the calibrated preemptive response, the pressured the radio station to close it. Anyway, and they made a film department. So that's the crucial combination of Kodao. So it's really good to the fine prints, the stories of how people from different persuasions merge. And me, I met AsiaVisions because I became an intern. One of their documentaries about the Philippine history, In the Blaze of Thousand Torches, that's the English title. I became part of that production as an intern, as a researcher, as a production assistant. So I'm not a part of their group, but that piqued my interest to contribute in documenting the experience of AsiaVisions and Kiri's group and Maricon's group, etc.
Thank you, Rose. No? So in a bit, I'll go to that question of the medium, and how it circulated and preservation, etc. But so just to point out, how the collectives were also really responding to the times. In other words, contingencies were really part of like crackdowns and being jailed or whatever. It's really part of the practice where everyone's practice had to adjust to historical contingencies. We are 47 in this room, and I'm just not sure how many of you are familiar with Philippine history. So I'll be very quickly annotating some of the things that were mentioned. So the two groups, Alter Horizons and AsiaVisions, that Rose Roque was talking about, were active during the Marcos period and the immediate post-Marcos period. And if you didn't know it by now, and it's worth repeating 1,000 times, that the Marcoses were dictators. They concentrated their power within their family. They closed down the legislative. They took over the judiciary, the military, ruled the Philippines. They practically stole like everything and left the people in great poverty, and in great debt. And in a way, there was a lot of censorship and crackdown during this period. And so the work of the collectives, to which I'll go. Another thing pala before I continue is that when people refer to EDSA, this is a shorthand for kind of collective physical demonstration, the biggest of which was in 1986. EDSA refers to the road or the highway where people gathered to finally ask Marcos to leave in 1986. And there's an EDSA 2, which happened to oust another corrupt president, ex-president Joseph Estrada. So when they say EDSA, this is they're referring to. So maybe I'll ask Rose quickly, and maybe ask Kiri and Maricon about the nature of this practice, right? Because after all, you do courageous work that in a way questions powers that be, right? And how do you do that, right? I mean, it's hard enough to make films with statements that are in the mainstream, but how much more films that are really not meant for commercial purposes, or not even for artistic purposes, but really to shake the establishment. So maybe Rose first. I'd like to ask about how you already mentioned that this wily move that the early collectives were using government or state media equipment, but how did they circulate the films that they make? And did they make the films secretly? Diba? Because it was, you could be jailed or tortured or disappeared during the Marcos period.
Let's just say that they're in the position to maximize resources, like their department heads of media offices of a specific institution that we're working on. So they can, like, I guess, work overtime and, making use of what's there. So they do it inside and outside their offices, just maximizing. So, or like if they are dispatched to cover something, they, extra efforts to cover more. So there, essentially, it's just really making do and turning the tables around that kind of stuff. So I don't want to divulge more because
Sure.
we still need to do those stuff now. We say stay calm.
Yeah, pero that's really interesting, kasi again, in the art world, we may speak of, say, institutional critique, but which is still alive and well, in major cultural institutions. For example, people inside critique the institution. But here's an interesting practice where, I don't know, double, parang nakastraddle, they're inside, but also, I don't know, they're sort of working sort of agents, special agents. How about the circulation of the works? I mean, they shoot the films, and how do people get to see the films?
Arrogance of Power, it's one of the early works of AsiaVisions. It was really shown December of when the Human Rights commemoration, Human Rights Day commemoration, because Senator Benigno Aquino Jr. was assassinated August 1983, right? So they showed it December of 83. So it's a public gathering in Christ the King Seminary. It's a place in Quezon City. So they gathered. So if they can assemble, they show it. But most of the times they do the Betamax copies and the VHS copies. So like schools, they go to their office and like the early subscription, they buy a copy. So if you Google, check, search in catalogs, AsiaVisions works reached far places, even in the Library of Congress, in university libraries here in the Philippines and abroad. So they reached through the beta tapes and VHS tapes. So it's like what I learned eventually, the term narrow casting. And it didn't happen just in the Philippines, because when I joined audiovisual archiving conferences, people talk about also narrowcasting as opposed to broadcasting. So being passed on that way. And even interesting, I'll be talking about a film docu made by BBC TV. It was not shown in the Philippines, that To Sing Our Own Song. It's a BBC TV production made 82, widely distributed 83. But people in the Philippines were able to watch it, and I got to see it in Belgium in an archive there. But when we organized a screening in April 23 in-person screening, BBC Archives allowed us to screen it. I talked to the generation who were able to watch it, and they were saying because there's a Betamax tape being passed on from one person to another. So that's one big, it's narrowcasting.
So there's there's an aspect of the DIY, also the parang the ethos din ng piracy and yung methods no di ba, copying, ripping. How about Kiri? You made some films in 16mm, but also when as you said, when you started Southern Tagalog Exposure digital, what was the mode of production like, and how did you exhibit or show or distribute these films?
Well, perhaps unlike the context of how Rose explained the background of the members of AsiaVisions, in our case, none of us in STeX were even film graduates. So we really were starting more from, like in my case, my sister was in film. So she lent us a camera, and then we also actively joined workshops so that we would also learn the ropes. So the summer workshops of Mobile Fund Film Institute was very critical, but we didn't have our own equipment. So we really relied on support from other individual filmmakers to lend us their microphones, cameras, as well as the editing equipment. None of us knew how to edit at that time. In fact, Ebon was critical because at that time they acquired their first Premiere desktop editing setup, and we learned by volunteering to subtitle and just ask other filmmakers to teach us. So that was how we learned. Because when I did my workshop in Mobile Fund, they were still using 16mm, so I really didn't have digital training as well. But in the early 2000s, that was when we started with VHS tapes for disseminating, but I remember how the mode of screening or showing the films, because in the beginning we were still known as just a simple audiovisual group, and we did not edit our works yet. We just documented. We documented the lakbayan, or even what was happening in picket lines, and we would simply plug the camera to a TV and show sections of it to people, to workers, so that they would see, there was really a violent dispersal that happened in, let's say, Cutler Hammer, this factory. And our first work was Lakbayan. This was also during the fall of Era Pestrada, documenting the movement of the people in Southern Tagalog to Manila. And we edited it, and it was on VHS tapes. It's a lost work. We were not able to save this. And then EDSA, mula EDSA to hanggang Menjola, 2001. This is very interesting because we only had one camera, and the uprising lasted for days. And literally we were asking people in the crowd with cameras if we could shoot, use our camera, and then we would set up a date to return the camera and the tapes. That was how it was. And since we also had no office, we just noted down, okay, what are the establishments around EDSA where we can charge. So we also figure out which galleries were friendly, which artists would host us. So that was that was the process. Quite, the term would be cowboy. I can't find the English translation.
That's amazing. That's really incredible. Yeah. I mean, this is somehow we get a picture of what it's like. Of course, first of all, outside of the industry and the political economy of the industry, also sort of outside the art scene, but in cooperation, right? So like going there without a camera and yet documenting, right? Tapping the resources of friends. I mean, these are really incredible stories of how it's done, right? On the fly.
Yes, and I think since we were outside of Metro Manila, I think I can say that generally the concept of having a lot of equipment or computers, it was still, it was very new to people to acquire expensive gadgets. And we really did operate, especially in the very beginning, on sort of like the support of the people. Like we went with that kind of ethos. And it was difficult, but at the same time, that really widened our network, our friends, because I guess if you were self-sufficient, sometimes you would no longer, in a way, you would be lazy to ask, like, to connect. But this is, I remember really, because of this lack, we were able to forge so many networks of friends and supporters.
That's great. So it's really a praxis that's part of the entire ethos of this. Well, exactly what you film and what you want to film is part of the praxis, right? Maricon, since you're you're the youngest in this panel, no, and you're in a way filming from the other side where you're using cameras are ubiquitous. Anyone has a camera, and you can distribute online, I guess. Can you say a little bit about how it's done now? I mean, of course, everyone is still active. Kiri is still active, but can you speak from this perspective, especially, for example, the film that you just made with Kodao last year? No, what is it like now?
Yeah. So before I answer that, I would just like to acknowledge the presence of Kodao Productions Executive Director. She's here with us. Jola Mamangon is listening. And
hello.
Hi, Jola. Okay, so I'm imagining that when Kodao started, I'm guessing it's very similar to how STeX also started. It's very DIY, very small scale. But that small scale production still continues in the present. And in our practice, we have this, we sort of like, we don't assign roles to the group. Like if there's an event, or if there is a demonstration that Kodao needs to cover, anyone who's available can readily cover or use the camera, get a video, get a cell phone, and use it for Facebook Live. So anyone can assume any position. Of course, there are some people who are more advanced in video editing. Some are not. Some are better in writing. Some are not. But definitely, the practice is, it's like everyone gets to have a shot in doing different roles in making a certain film or video production. And if I were to talk about how we created River of Tears and Rage, basically, it was news coverage of the burial of Baby River. So just for context, Baby River is a daughter of a political prisoner, Reyna Nasino, and when Reyna Nasino was imprisoned, she found out there that she was pregnant. So the human rights groups and lawyers and her lawyers tried to petition for better jail condition during the pregnancy and in time for her when she was about to give birth. But sadly, the state forces, the BJNP and the Supreme Court did not grant this, and then it led to the death of Baby River. So so the lawyers tried to push again for 48-hour furlough so that Reyna Nasino can be with her daughter before she is buried. But then the 48-hour furlough was shortened to 6 hours, if I am not mistaken, in 2 days. So that was, I think, 3 hours in 2 days. So I cannot imagine the pain that she went through. So before this event happened, Kodao has been following the story of Ina Nasino and her daughter, and also other political prisoners and other human rights violation cases, etc. So so it was not a so when the news of babies during the burial, everyone, when the police tried to hijack the car where the baby was laid, it luckily, fortunately, that the video team was there, so they got to capture everything in Facebook Live. So what you saw on that short clip there was actually a footage from the Facebook Live coverage that Kodao recorded. So if I am not mistaken, Kodao was the only alternative media group who captured the whole event, like the complete turn of events during that time. So I was actually not there because I was in a different location. But months after that that event, I got to see the rough cut, and I said to another member of Kodao, let's make this a short film, because I think it's very relevant. So when everybody when everybody agreed to that, everybody really helped in creating the film. So it was a collective effort, to be honest. And then hence the film River of Tears and Rage. So the practice is I think it's a different quite different from the previous decades, because this one is like from social media. So cameras are high-end cameras, DSLRs or mirrorless cameras is good, but another option is available now, which is social media footages, camera phones, and I think in a way it also helps in swiftly recording, or like recording what's happening, especially now that a lot of events are happening very quickly. And I think it's very essential that we get to record the truth, because truth now is very tangible, very it's very, can be easily distorted. So
thank you, Maricon. I'm going to segue from that, but also just to highlight, we see in these three answers the evolution, not only of the equipment and the medium, but also the method, diba? And also the immediacy and the way the people are involved, the notion of people involved, not only with people's organizations and the collective itself, but the way these groups work with others, right? Or immediately share with others, as in the case of Maricon, people who are watching Facebook Live are part of the entire process. Let me segue now, because we're sort of running out of time. and we want questions, of course, from our audience. So just to give this this discussion some thought regarding what's happening at present, right? So Maricon is speaking about how truth is easily distorted, right? So in a way, it's very easy to document because all of us have cameras, but also, well, there's this really distortion of truth, historical distortion, revisionism, right? Disinformation. Can you speak about the work of political film collectives in this scenario where in the past you had censorship, right? But now you have, in a way, no censorship, but like all kinds of information floating around where the works of collectives are just side by side with all kinds of lies and distortion, right? So what kind of challenge is that for collectives today, specifically during the presidency of Rodrigo Duterte, who's the first one to be catapulted to the presidency via social media popularity, and of course, Bongbong Marcos these days, to recently, no? So can you speak a little bit about that? Siguro we end with Rose, so we can begin with Kiri, but Rose can speak a little bit about how you're recovering memory, no, by showing these old 1980s films, no? But Kiri muna, what is it like? Resbak, for example, how has the practice differed now? May disinformation, may social media.
Yes, so context, Resbak was formed in the last quarter of 2016. That's the earliest months of Rodrigo Duterte. And we specifically formed this group because we felt that we were in the midst of something overwhelmingly different, a scenario where there appears to be a majority, like 16 million Filipinos who voted for Duterte, and in the first 6 months of his rule appeared to be lauding the killings that were happening under the drug war. So what was different? I guess coming to terms with this, with the reality. In fact, I I prepared this quote that that was written by David Ramirez, one of the artists who collaborated with Resbak. This is what he wrote. When the majority is simply wrong, this was from 2016, logic just won't do it. It needs to be artists, the musicians, who change the hearts of those who have an off switch for their humanity. There is a real need now for every kind of creative to sculpt their arrows and fight with their pens and guitars and stories. There is no Game of Thrones to capture and transform the minds on all the big issues with the world yet. Not Miyazaki, not J.K. Rowling or Stephen King. And there won't be unless one of us creates it. But even small things, children's stories, poems, songs that move something small in people might move that needle just a little. There are murders on the streets every night perpetrated by gunmen at the behest of the powerful. Lies are the truth. Evil be thou, my good. It is in these times of powerlessness, of weakness, that is exactly when art is most mighty. So we, well, what was the difference? I think from the beginning, we knew that we appeared to be a minority in 2016. And the more overwhelming voice on social media appeared to be pro-Duterte. So we formed this collective and also came out with works which we dispersed through the internet. It took some time before, but after a few months, we also decided to do face-to-face film screenings as well as activities in communities. So we felt that what was the engagement needed to be more, like we had to go beyond making films and really try to connect. And I guess that was one. I mean, Resbak was my first collective after after ST exposure, where I really felt that it was necessary to come together.
Yeah, so no, actually during the Marcos Senior, I should say Marcos period, no? Marcos period na naman tayo ngayon. No? But during the first Marcos Senior period, different art forms were really engaging as well. But I think in what Kiri's saying, there's really a lot more integration. There's really a lot more immediacy also in the way the arts come together and address the people. That's really a powerful quote. Thank you for sharing it, Kiri. How about Maricon? What is your experience now with disinformation side by side with documentaries, right? I mean, you want to tell the truth, but I mean, they sit side by side on a Facebook wall or say TikTok or whatever, or Instagram, where the lies are just there, right? So has it been difficult? What is it like, the struggle, Maricon?
Yeah, it's quite difficult, especially since Kodao has been forever been red tag for the longest time. And at the same time, just recently, Kodao and other alternative media outfits were attacked by, experienced cyber attacks. So while our film collectives, our media collectives were trying to create different film and video outputs, here our websites and our websites were attacked by DDoS traffic. Just a bit of context, DDoS is some sort of a cyber attack where there is there are several units that simultaneously try to access your website, and it creates a traffic. So
swarm,
yeah, it's like a swarm. So the website shuts down and is not able to function. So that's one of the challenges that Kodao experienced during the Duterte regime. So luckily, there was a Swedish nonprofit, Curium, who reached out and then investigated, helped out in this problem, and they discovered that the traffic came from two government departments. So one is in the military department, and one is from Department of Science and Technology. So of course they denied it, but the investigation of a third party is clear. So aside from that, there is a constant red tagging. So if you try to look at our Facebook pages and our YouTube profile, it's full of red tagging statements. So it's quite hard, but at the same time, we try to produce even more. So the team is always there when there are mass actions, mass gatherings, demonstrations. Especially they try to cover events that or gatherings that are organized by the marginalized sector. So that's one of the basic or the fundamentals of our film collectives. We try to give voices to those marginalized sectors. So it's a struggle, but then again, we also try to maximize the power of social media. So if the state is using social media, we are also maximizing it to create videos, spread information that are backed up by facts and is truthful, and is also it's more on the side of the people.
I just want to underline that for our listeners. I think this is very important to highlight this kind of struggle, because the Duterte presidency, and we are very sure the new Marcos Jr. presidency will rely on red tagging. So I'm sure you are familiar with red tagging, but just in case, it's also to speak about the dynamics in the Philippines. So the state has really harnessed its resources in order to tag every critical view against the government as a communist view. And therefore, red tagging them putting them in harm's way, calling them terrorists. So any kind of critical view is tagged this way. And so collectives, of course, suffer this the most because, well, they're in the forefront of trying to expose things, and therefore they're called terrorists all the time. And it's really a dangerous situation for these filmmakers and artists. Rose, maybe you can say the last thing before we open the floor for questions. So the works from the 80s, in a way, you're some sort of custodian for it. And what is their importance in the present time, right? They're films from the past, but we see a little bit more of them these days. How do you view their position or their situation as old films in the present?
Quickly, I need to emphasize when you ask the distribution channel before, it should be pointed out that AsiaVisions has this concept of mobile cinema, and they named it Sineng Bayan. Our top title or concept you floated right away when we started the webinar is called People's Cinema, and that's in Filipino, Sineng Bayan. And when I found that, like in Kiri's group, Southern Tagalog exposure, they're not aware that Sineng Bayan was the name of the mobile cinema of AsiaVisions, but they also labeled their outreach, right, Kiri, right? So it was like making, you know, that essence that people, these groups are united with the essence of a cinema for the people. And that's why I wanted to emphasize that in response to your current question, that we really want a widespread, you know, distribution like a mainstream cinema. But we know that it's really challenging. You know, it's very close to impossible to be. We hope eventually that this would be the popular cinema. But during AsiaVisions and Alter Horizons period, there's this level of like they're the go-to groups, because it's so hard to cover places. In a way, people rely on them to get, you know, alternative sources of information. When Kiri and Maricon explained the available technology now that's given to many, including the platforms to show their works, it's positive because you have a wider platform. But at the same time, we are confronted with that issue of, you know, flooding. I mean, what is data overload, or so on one hand, that very technology or conditions that we can maximize now is the very same challenge that we have to handle. Sadly, it's the Marcoses who were able to maximize that now. They propagated the distortion, the historical distortion, disinformation via social media. And that's something that is really a challenge to us. So, but we can't, you know, so far really 100% confront or do the same things that they can. So we do everything. Like we still now we maximize Facebook, though there's this critique of Facebook as proprietary, the Facebook downgrading the quality. I mean, you know, those critique of using social media, of YouTube, etc. But we maximize it. So we live stream those films that we can via my organization, Concerned Artists of the Philippines. We have the Memory Project. We started, well, with 2018, there's this Memory Project before with Kiri. She was able to organize with in December of 2018. Remember, Kiri, that Memory Project in the Cultural Center of the Philippines with the 13 artists. But we managed to continue the spirit of the Memory Project via screening films since September 2020 to recently, April 30, we managed 10 memory projects, though one is not online because it was only an in-person license to screen from BBC Archives. But the point is, we do everything we can maximize. So from live Facebook live streaming, but we download the recording right away because we have a talkback that is recorded, and that's very precious because there's no other recording of talkbacks during memory projects. So, but we also do in-person screening because we have to break that consciousness that the only way to do something is online. We really have to go offline, to go back to the grassroots, to the ground. So we were really planning on doing online and offline, but we have now. I'll share the link. Engage Media reach out and ask me to program for them the 5 films that I was able to program for UP Film Institute during your time, Patrick. So that's the political filmmaking in the period of social unrest in 2018. So we're doing a redo now, and it's extended. It's supposed to be until May 9 only, but it's an immediate response that no, we'll continue. So it's until June 3, and well, hopefully forever using the Engage Media platform. So and we're not only talking about AsiaVision films now. So to make it short, we're doing everything online, offline, but as I borrowed the term pink movement during the elections, did the house to house, we call the heart to heart, person to person kind of explaining. I think even if it's a slower process, I think that's very more effective if we really we person to person discuss this together with screenings. We'll have talkbacks live in person.
Thank you, Rose. No, so just to mention that, and if you have questions, please let us know via the chat box or the Q&A box. But just to say that the memory project, I think, is very important because historical distortion really is what led to the win of the Marcoses, right? From really brutal dictators who stole everything suddenly to heroes of a golden age. So it's a really distorted view, and the memory project that Rose was talking about, at least the 2020 edition or the version that Rose was talking about with the concerned artists of the Philippines, what they had tried to do is to bring back all these documentaries to remind people that, hey, this happened, right? I mean, you cannot deny these things that had happened. So these are, I think, very, very important. A very important role of collectives, really, that even if the films were done many years ago, they still resonate today. They're still very important today. So just want to highlight that part. In the struggle, in the current struggle, these older films are still very, very important, very crucial. So maybe if you have questions, I can call Wood back in to help me facilitate.
OK， 我看到一个观众的问题。
Okay, I see one question. So actually, before I call on the question, I would like to share something from my observation first. So this year we played Beyond the Prison Walls. So it was supposed to be screened publicly on YouTube. But after we uploaded the video, YouTube warned us and said that there are copyright issues with the video. And the owner of the copyright, it says it's ABC Development Corporation. So we looked up this corporation, and it's actually a construction company. So we are not sure if it's an accident or it's a sign of red tagging or it's a censorship. So that's why we switched it. We put it on video instead. So here we have a question in Chinese. the questions, as all the panelists today are female. So we are curious when it comes to political and social activism, are there disparities between the two genders?
Maybe Kiri, you're the best person to answer this question. Maybe speaking both as part of collectives, but also as a documentary filmmaker, right? Can you speak a little bit about the dominance of women practitioners in these truth-telling modes?
Yes, I did notice early on that we're all women. It's perfectly fine. It's not oftentimes that we're the majority, but yes, I think there's a very strong female voice in the field of documentary filmmaking, and but it's something that we're proud of. From Ditsi Carolina, Ajani Arumpak, they're also part of the festival, but women have like in our work in Resbak, a lot of those who are standing up are women, of course, widows, mothers, daughters of those who have been killed in the drug war, and it's not necessarily a fast process, but yes, I believe that in the pink movement, as Rose calls it as well. I mean, that we have Lenny Robredo, the sole woman who ran for president, and we all backed her up. But are we dominant in the protest?
Or maybe in the kind of truth-telling form, like documentary. I mean, especially documentary, I guess. You could say, if not there are more women, at least women's works are more well circulated, or maybe more well known, or more awarded, or something. There's a degree of visibility, I think, in this form, documentary, where women really dominate.
Well, that's interesting. Like from a more, I don't know the studies, but of course, traditionally, women are always the ones who are sort of given the responsibility of sharing stories, right? Passing things on to children, from songs to to stories. I think I couldn't help but recall this scene from Alonsina, for example, which Patrick is familiar with, where a grandmother was singing as a lullaby "Bayan Ko," or "My Country," to her children. So it's I feel that it's I don't know, because I want all genders to be part of this. So I don't necessarily find it to be something to be proud of if you say that it's women only, because it has to be everyone. So I guess that's my position.
But I guess you're right that there's a mothering quality. I think especially in documentary, I guess it takes a long time. I mean, you have to immerse, you have to know the people. I mean, so there's an element. It's just a theory, you know. I'm not saying this is the actual social scientific explanation, but I guess a kind of mothering element where it's relational. You have to care. You have to be patient. You have to be present. I mean, it's my theory, no. But also, I was struck by your idea that the widows, the mothers, and the daughters of the victims of the drug war, right? So the victims of the drug war are usually men and breadwinners, and so when they're killed by vigilantes or the police, the women are left and they mourn and they become part of the resistance. Thank you for pointing that out here. Maybe there's another question.
我目前没有看到其他的问
I
题。
don't see additional questions from the chat rooms, but during your discussions, I have a few things I want to ask. I'm curious. Before the film festival, we invited to write an articles to publish in one of our magazines to talk about how since the 1980s, you have actually preserved and restored a lot of videos, and we have said that many people tend to forget very easily. So I want to know that when we are producing these contents, besides distributions, have you thought about how to preserve it and how to open it up for other people to use it in your collective?
Yeah, Maricon, maybe you can answer this one. What is being done to preserve, archive, and redistribute materials you made?
So in Kodao, we actually have a current project which we are trying to digitize all our video footages from 2001 up to present. So these are in high A tapes, and this project is funded by the NCCA. So National what's NCCA again? National Cultural Center.
National Commission for
Commission.
Culture and the Arts.
Okay, sorry. Sorry about that. Anyway, so this project, we want to, since we're trying to digitize it, we want to put this in a website where everybody gets to have access on the footages that we have. So I know that the project is still ongoing, and we're trying to start it. So that's one of our ways that we're trying to preserve our archives. So, and from what I've heard, the footages that we have are very like rare footages, like interviews from mass leader, organizational leaders in the that have passed away, some rebel leaders from the communist armed group. So these are very relevant footages, and we want people to have access and share the knowledge that and we want to share the knowledge and this rich footages that we have. So that's one of our efforts.
Thank you.
Maybe I can go next. Perhaps similar to like what Rose said, the memory project was conceived as something as urgent to deal with memory politics, and but the initial idea was very ambitious, so that it was not just to show artifacts or films, but also to connect the earlier generation to the present. And it was not going to be just in the realm of cinema, but also music, or even science and theater, labor. So we had this very broad vision, and so that was one. And then in Resbak, we also began a series of talks about database and society, where we felt that even if the works that we've done were made just in the last 6 years, it was necessary to continue to show them and contextualize them and remind them. So have this access and and organize it in a database, but also at the same time understand the infrastructure of the database and how to make it really useful for people's movements. Most of the works of Resbak are dispersed in Facebook or even YouTube, but there really needs to be a place, a repository for access. So yeah, that's what we're doing. If there's something that we understood even more deeply in the last decade, it's that democracy or memory is fragile. So we need to continuously tell the story and share it, and not just be content with our own circles, but also be sensitive, for example, to like with Resbak, we have film screenings in real space, but we also saw that it's not easy for audiences outside of the middle class, for example, to access this. Even if you provide transportation to people from the working class, they are not necessarily available because of work. So you have to go in really close and organize something closer. So that's the challenge.
Thank you, Kiri. I think that we've been able to cover that, no, from archiving it to making it available again in different ways, and keeping them in circulation so that the narratives are never forgotten. So it's from one end to keeping them and archiving them to making them actively present. It's an entire spectrum. Thank you.
I mentioned about maximizing the opportunities. So when Maricon mentioned about the digitization project of the Kodao collection, it's the very same committee, the National Committee on Archives of the National Commission for Culture and Arts, that gave the grant to Ibon Foundation to digitize the AsiaVisions collection. Well, a significant number, because the amount is not yet enough to cover everything, especially it's in thematic. So we have this problem with obsolescence, the issue of the existing players to digitize this thematic. But still, this committee, it's a disclosure that I'm a member of that committee. So that committee that gave the grant, I'm a part of that, and I actually actively campaigned to these groups that we should maximize the available resources, because it's a very important task to preserve the documentary heritage of the Filipinos, and political film collectives, their archival collection is definitely a big contribution to the documentary heritage. It's not the entirety. I always say that it doesn't cover the entire history of the Filipino people, but definitely a very important part of the puzzle. If memory keeping, especially now, because generations before us missed opportunities, or even the political leaders missed the opportunity or they really consciously missed the opportunity to ensure social justice and made the Marcoses pay for their crimes. We're still we still have chunks of our history being made, and like a puzzle being solved until now. So these groups are contributing the preservation of those materials. Definitely would be a part of this puzzle solving.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you.
Thank you. 这边还有一位
Okay, I saw another questions coming from the chat rooms. From our news in Taiwan, we noticed that in the recent campaigns, Pompon or Little Marcus are also producing a lot of YouTube videos. And now creating videos is a very prevalent tool. How does that kind of movement influence your works? And in some way, it's like a media war. So how do you fight this kind of war from political propaganda?
That's great. I really like the translation of Little Marcos. So that's a great question. How do you contend or contest these overproduction of the Marcoses narrative in video? Maybe one of you can, either Maricon or Kiri can answer this. So in case we have another question. Or maybe if I may reframe the question, do you engage with these images and stories produced by the Marcoses, or are you doing it almost totally separately with no engagement with what is produced by this? So does it affect your work, or is it totally independent? Kiri,
Well,
and then,
okay, with Resbak, we did try, like we opened a TikTok account specifically because we wanted to also to verify. It's not our natural space, but it really is so hard. We thought at first that, okay, we'll try to engage, we'll make short films as well and put it out in TikTok. But I guess it was a challenge for us, like to compel ourselves to adjust to this format, which we don't have a natural affinity to. So we ended there. I think we were able to upload just one video on TikTok, for example.
Can you say what the challenge is? Is the challenge the form, or is the challenge like the consistency? Because I know TikTok, you have to make a lot. Or what exactly is challenging about TikTok, which is used by the Marcoses really effectively?
Yes. First, of course, we needed to when we started, like we had volunteers, like the TikTok team to try, and I think we ended up by just saying that, okay, if it doesn't come naturally, maybe just use it, not for political means, just to get used to the format, sing or dance. That doesn't have to be political, just to get the grasp of the medium. But yeah, it's not we were wondering, is this generational? But we did see that there are activists who did very well, who were able to use the TikTok format to engage, but it's very brief. I feel that it's, well, personally, I felt that it's a very limiting medium. You cannot really, but perhaps it's also, that's also the answer. Like maybe people don't have enough time to really stop and listen. So something has to be done where you find a way for people to stop, not just view this random video or viral video. Just use these as possible triggers. But definitely, it's painful to watch the videos that they have been producing. From the time under Duterte, they've already been producing a lot of these, and I believe paying also directors. I mean, from the State of the Nation address, they were able to get top-tier directors like Villante Mendoza, Joyce Bernal to direct. So what more these other films? And engaging is hard. We're up against the Goliath. They have all the resources. They have an entire network. All of these all of the institutions of government to back them up, while we contend with their negligence, meaning we're individual artists who are also organizing food support for our neighbors, as well as trying to survive during the pandemic, and at the same time also fighting judicial attacks. I myself, I have these hearings every so often. So we have this, the challenge is so great, and that's why I think that we the necessity of collective work. No individual can do this. We have to come together, collectives, and then form collectives, and then these different collectives come together and then find support. If we don't have the means, then find people who can support this as well. But definitely the films, we can really counter this, like what they're doing. They're really bad, ugly works. And it's just, but we really do need to, working on our own works as short films is really difficult, but we have to find a way to create works that can counter these narratives and show them widely there. And also, the work of Rose is also very critical. Finding these works from the past and then surfacing them again and showing them broadly, translating them in Filipino, if in different languages if necessary. I think it has to be done.
Salamat, Kiri. So I think we have a couple more questions.
Okay. Yeah. 我们还有2个问题，但
We
是
actually have 2 more questions, but we are going over, so we will have to wrap it up hopefully within 5 minutes. Okay, so the first question is that most documentary filmmakers seem to be interested in political topics. Other documentary filmmakers who are interested in more casual topics. And the second question is that the speakers talked about the memory project, and in China, there's also a people's memory project. So are there any exchanges or correlations between the 2 projects?
All right, thank you. I'm not sure of the second question. I will hazard a guess that there's really no sustained kind of exchanges, and there should be, I think. Would you know of any, Kiri or Rose or Maricon? So we just need to answer the first one. And I think this is also Kiri's question because you're active in both political film collectives and non-political film collective documentary work, right? So the question being, Filipino documentary filmmakers do a lot of political documentaries, but are there other kinds of documentaries aside from political ones?
Oh, wow. I would love to do something. I mean, I'm really looking forward to the time when it's not necessary anymore. Like I can do films about, I know, I really wanted, for example, to be, to be a nature nature filmmaker. And but yeah, I guess it's just a matter of like if you have the resources and the time, where would you give it? And I feel that as much as I would like to make a film about like just my son like dancing, although I think it can still be political, but just not having this this space or this privilege to shoot this because I think that I would devote it to something that's affecting people beyond my family. I think it's already taking up a position. For many years, my family has been bugging me or getting mad because we're not making a documentary about our family history or a relative who passed away and had accomplishments. But this is it. I mean, we have to think beyond our families or our personal and I think if we are able to bring down the ills of society or expose this, like what's happening now with Marcos and Duterte, this will eventually pave the way for us to make films freely without thinking that or feeling this feeling that we should have given it to something. Sorry, I'm rambling, but I just don't want you to have this conception that we're not human. I mean, we would love to do other stories, and I think it's also within our right to do it. But we chose to do political works, and now you see the reason why. Perhaps if more of us were doing this, then I wouldn't be making political films now.
Thank you, Kiri. If you allow me, if I may sort of wrap up, because five would said we need to I think that question sort of hit something, hit the nail on the head, right? Because documentary filmmaking in the Philippines today is really flourishing. And so I think we could say that there would be non-political casual documentaries being made for sure. But I think the question is able to bring to our attention the fact that this flourishing documentary practice in the Philippines today is really political. And this is political on all kinds of political level, right? Can be national politics, gender politics, anything. And I think that is kind of characteristic of Filipino documentaries, is that it is really political on so many levels. And that also, in such a time as this, the documentary form becomes really an urgent form, because sometimes having to tell fiction and all these kinds of film forms create more gaps sometimes, or at least take so long. But documentaries, there's this immediacy, and in a way, it is really the form to use today, more than any. So I think that it flowers now, and that this is the political situation now. They're in a way converging. These are really two important moments coming together, cinematic and political. So I hope that sort of summarizes this in line with what TIDF also does. Thank you.
非常谢谢
Yes, thank you to all three of our panelists and Patrick, our moderator. So just like I mentioned earlier, when we talk about Asian vision or back in the 80s, we see similar trends or topics across Asia Pacific. Same thing here in Taiwan. And I think through having these platforms, these forums, by having these exchanges, we can become bigger. So especially now that mainstream media, they are controlled by big money, big corporation, big government, we have the responsibility to do more. So I think seeing all these documentaries, independent films, experimental films, we really need to do our utmost to support them so that they can flourish. So unfortunately, we have run out of time for today, but hopefully all audience members today, you can spend more time after the meeting's over to get to know more about Filipino documentaries. So again, thank you all for participating. Thanks to all our speakers and audience members. This concludes today's panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you next time. Bye bye.